They say a wedding reveals the true nature of a family. I used to think that meant love, unity, and celebration. But as I stood beneath a canopy of fairy lights, watching my daughter dance with her new husband, I realized it also reveals the fractures you never knew were there. Everything looked perfect, painfully perfect, the kind of perfection you almost don't trust. The soft glow of candles, the clink of champagne flutes, my daughter laughing the way she used to when she was little. I should have been able to breathe. I should have felt joy. Instead, something inside me tightened the moment the band shifted into a slow, romantic song. Across the room, I spotted my husband. Not unusual, but what stole my breath was who he was with. Claire. My best friend of 20 years. My loyal confidant. The woman who held my hand when I went into labor with my daughter. The woman who claimed she never had time to settle down because her career came first. She was dancing with him. Too closely. Far too closely. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Weddings make people emotional. Champagne makes them bold. But the longer I watched, the colder my blood ran. His hand slid down the small of her back. Her fingers drifted up to straighten the lapel of his suit, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. They leaned in to whisper something, smiling like they shared a private joke. No, like they shared a private world. My smile froze in place as a quiet dread settled in my chest. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. A perfect wedding? No. Perfection was just the wrapping. Inside, something rotten was waiting to be uncovered. I kept watching them, torn between disbelief and the instinctive dread twisting in my stomach. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of the wedding, the responsibility, the emotions were making me paranoid. But then Claire threw her head back in laughter, tilting dangerously on her heels as she swayed in my husband's arms, and the moment stretched too long. Too intimate. Too wrong. I took a step toward them, ready to interrupt, anything to break the uncomfortable spell forming between them. But before I could reach the dance floor, it happened in a single, jarring moment. Claire's heel slid, her ankle twisted, and she went crashing down. The music screeched to a halt. Guests gasped. Someone screamed her name. A circle formed around her as she writhed on the floor, clutching her leg and breathing in sharp, panicked bursts. My husband dropped to his knees beside her, his face stricken, not with the concern of a friend, but the panic of someone who has far too much to lose. I froze at the edge of the circle, and that's when I saw it, a small velvet pouch skidding out from her clutch, landing near my shoe. I bent down and picked it up without thinking, more out of habit than curiosity. The moment I felt the weight inside, my heart lurched. I opened it just enough to see the glint. My diamond bracelet. The one that disappeared 3 months ago. The one my husband insisted I had misplaced. I lifted my gaze and met his eyes across the crowd, his face drained of color. In that instant, I realized Claire's fall hadn't just broken the wedding's harmony, it had shattered the illusion I'd been living in. I barely had time to process the bracelet in my hand when a hesitant voice called my name from behind. Mrs. Hart? Can I talk to you for a second? I turned to find Daniel, our wedding photographer, hovering near the edge of the chaos. He looked pale, almost queasy, and clutched his camera tight against his chest, as if afraid it might betray him. His eyes kept darting between me, my husband, and Claire, still surrounded by concerned guests. Now's not really a good time, I murmured. He swallowed. I know. But it's important. Really important. There was something desperate in his expression, something that made me follow him to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the murmurs and gasps. My pulse thudded painfully as Daniel fumbled with his camera, scrolling through a series of photos. I wasn't going to say anything, he muttered nervously, but when I saw what happened just now, I thought you should know. Photo after photo flashed before me. Happy couples, swirling lights, clinking glasses, until he stopped on one. My husband, Claire. Not on the dance floor, but outside, in the garden. They weren't kissing. They weren't touching. but the way they leaned into each other, the posture, the secrecy, felt unmistakably intimate. Daniel hesitated before showing the next image. This one really worried me. Claire stood half turned away from the camera, her hand pressed over her stomach. Not casually, protectively, her expression was anxious. My husband stood close, too close, his head bent as if whispering something urgent. I felt the room tilt. "Mrs. Hart." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. They went outside like that multiple times. The bracelet had cracked the surface. But these photos? They suggested something far deeper. Something dangerous lay underneath. When Daniel slipped away, I was left holding the weight of his photos like they were evidence from a crime scene. My breath felt trapped somewhere between my chest and throat as I walked back toward the crowd. The reception hall was buzzing now, not with celebration, but with unease. Claire had been lifted into a chair, her ankle propped on a cushion, her face flushed and streaked with tears. Guests whispered around her in hushed circles. My husband hovered at her side, trying, and failing, to look composed. He jumped when he saw me return, his eyes flicking to the velvet pouch in my hand. He opened his mouth, but before a single excuse could spill out, Claire let out a sharp, shaky sob. I can't do this. I can't." The room fell silent. Even the string lights seemed to hum quieter. My daughter stepped forward, confusion etched across her face. "Claire, what are you talking about?" Claire pressed her hands over her face, shoulders trembling. Then, slowly, she lowered them, revealing the terror, guilt, and desperation swimming in her eyes. "I'm pregnant." The words detonated in the air. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped a glass. My heart plummeted. Claire's chin quivered as she pointed, not at the air, not at fate, but straight at my husband. And it's his. The world blurred. I heard people whispering. Felt my daughter stiffen beside me. Saw my husband recoil as if the accusation had physically struck him. He stuttered, face pale. "Claire, don't do this." But Claire wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze locked onto me, brimming with remorse, or fear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Sorry for what? For the affair? For the lies? For ruining my daughter's wedding? Or for something much worse? The room was frozen, the chatter gone, every eye riveted on Claire and my husband. The atmosphere had shifted from celebration to charged chaos. My pulse pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I wanted to speak, to demand the truth, but words stuck in my throat. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, my daughter, the bride. She stepped forward, her wedding gown shimmering like armor, her expression unreadable. The chatter died entirely as she raised a hand. "I think it's time someone told the truth," she said, her voice calm but slicing through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to her. My husband opened his mouth, as if to protest, but she didn't flinch. "I've known," she continued, her gaze flicking to Claire. "I've known about your little secret for weeks." Claire's mouth opened, then shut. My husband's face drained of color. The guests exchanged nervous glances. The music from earlier, the laughter, the champagne, everything vanished, leaving a thick silence that clung to every corner of the room. "And the fall tonight?" My daughter's voice was steady, but the edge of something sharp, something dangerous, rippled beneath it. "It wasn't an accident. The floor was wet." "Claire slipped because I made sure she would." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's eyes widened in horror, panic flashing in them. My husband stumbled backward, disbelief and fury warring on his face. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and suddenly, it was my daughter who held all the control. "You thought you could ruin this day," she whispered, barely audible. "But the truth always comes out. And today, everyone sees it." I felt a mixture of pride and horror swell inside me. My daughter had orchestrated the perfect exposure. The chaos of betrayal had just become public spectacle, and the fallout was only beginning. I sank into a chair at the edge of the chaos, clutching the velvet pouch as if it were a lifeline. My chest felt tight, every breath a struggle. Betrayal had a flavor I'd never known. Bitter, metallic, and suffocating all at once. My husband, the man I'd trusted with my heart for decades, and Claire, my dearest friend, the woman I had confided in more than anyone, both had been hiding this from me? From all of us. I tried to make sense of it, but my mind refused. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Years? Every smile, every casual touch, every whispered conversation I thought was innocent. Was it all a lie? And then there was my daughter, the bride. She knew. She had known. Not just known, but orchestrated the fall, the exposure, the spectacle. My little girl, my sweet, trusting child, had become a master of strategy I hadn't suspected she even possessed. I felt both pride and a sharp, twisting pain. How could she keep such a secret? How could she manipulate all of us so brilliantly without letting her emotions slip? The guests were murmuring, pointing fingers, whispering about who was guilty and who was innocent. I felt the weight of eyes on me, expecting me to react, to take control, to somehow restore order. But how could I? My entire world had fractured in the span of a few minutes. Trust, love, loyalty, all shattered. I looked at my husband. His face was pale, taut with shame and fear. He opened his mouth, probably to lie, but I couldn't hear him. The sound of betrayal was deafening in my ears. Everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life around, it was gone, and in its place was a chilling clarity. Nothing would ever be the same. My husband's face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he stepped back from Claire, as if distance could erase what had just happened. I could see the panic flickering in his eyes, the same panic that had hit him when the bracelet was revealed. But now, exposed in front of everyone, he was cornered, desperate, grasping for some shred of control. "It's not what you think," he stammered, his voice shaking but trying to sound steady. "Claire, she's lying. This is a misunderstanding." A low murmur rippled through the guests. My pulse raced. Misunderstanding? After the slip, the pouch, the bracelet, and the photos, the silence around us made his denial sound even more hollow. I was helping her," he continued, his words frantic, almost pleading. "It's not what you think. She's dealing with something personal. I was only—" He stopped abruptly, as if the truth clawed at him before he could finish the lie. His eyes darted to me, then my daughter, then back to Claire. Every glance betrayed him, and every tremor of his body shouted what he refused to admit. Claire's gaze locked on him, her eyes narrowing in a mixture of fear and accusation. The room was charged, electric with anticipation. Every whisper, every glance, felt like it could ignite into chaos at any second. I didn't," he faltered, swallowed, and looked around helplessly. But the damage was done. His desperate denials only deepened suspicion. He sounded guilty because he was guilty, or at least something far worse than anyone had yet realized. I sank back, watching him unravel, feeling a cold, bitter mix of heartbreak and rage. The man I had trusted with everything was crumbling right in front of me, and there was no saving him from what was coming next. Claire sat in her chair, ankle still elevated, but her body was taut with something far heavier than pain. Her hands shook, her breath came in uneven gasps, and her eyes darted around the room, searching for escape, or perhaps for some unseen authority to protect her from the storm she had helped ignite. I could see it clearly now, the confession of her pregnancy, the accusation at my husband. It was only part of the story. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, pleading silently, but there was fear behind the pleading, a fear that had nothing to do with a fall or an ankle injury. This was fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of someone far more dangerous than any of us realizing the truth. She swallowed hard, glancing at my husband as he tried to regain some semblance of composure. His tense posture, the beads of sweat forming at his temples, betrayed his desperation. But Claire's fear wasn't about him. It was about protecting someone else. Someone we didn't yet know. Someone whose involvement could destroy far more than a marriage or a friendship. I studied her carefully, noticing the tiny tremble in her fingers as she toyed with the hem of her dress. The guilt etched across her face was real, but so was the calculated restraint, the careful crafting of her story. I realized then that she was balancing on a knife's edge, maintain her lie and protect the hidden truth, or break and risk a revelation that could unravel everything. And as I watched, I understood something chilling. The pregnancy confession wasn't the climax of this story, it was the beginning. Something far darker, far more dangerous, was still hiding in the shadows, and Claire was guarding it with her life. The room had grown unbearably tense, a charged silence pressing in on everyone. Claire's trembling confession had shifted the atmosphere, but now, a deeper, heavier truth hung in the air. My heart raced as I searched her face for any hint, any crack in her carefully constructed story. And then, the truth began to surface, not the one we expected, but one far more devastating. She drew a shaky breath, eyes flicking nervously toward someone in the back of the hall. I need to be honest, Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper. Every ear strained to hear, every gaze locked on her. I'm not pregnant with his child. The words struck like a hammer. A collective gasp filled the hall. I could feel my knees weaken, my pulse hammering in my ears. My husband's face went pale, confusion and relief battling across his features. Claire's hands clutched the chair, knuckles white. I lied about that part, she admitted, the confession heavy with guilt and fear. I did it to protect someone else, someone connected to your family. The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a labyrinth of secrets, carefully hidden. Someone powerful, someone dangerous, someone whose identity could tear our family apart in ways none of us had imagined. I stared at her, speechless. The room spinning. Everything we had assumed, the bracelet, the dancing, the whispered lies, was only the surface. Beneath it was a shadow far larger, far more insidious. And in that moment, I understood. The real storm hadn't hit yet. The revelation wasn't about my husband or Claire. It was about someone else entirely. Someone whose involvement would shake the foundation of our lives, leaving us questioning everything we thought we knew. The betrayal we had feared was just the beginning. The wedding hall had transformed into a battlefield. Where there had once been laughter, music, and celebration, there was now murmurs, pointed glances, and the heavy weight of secrets revealed. Betrayal had been exposed, but the air was thick, with the sense that the story was far from over. Every glance, every movement carried suspicion. Every word could ignite chaos. I sat back, exhausted, the velvet pouch still in my hands, a small symbol of the first crack in our family's illusion of stability. My husband avoided my gaze, his pride shattered, his desperation laid bare. Claire sat frozen, anxious and protective, her mind clearly racing ahead, guarding the secret that none of us yet fully understood. My daughter, the bride, stood like a sentinel in the center of it all, her expression a mixture of triumph and wariness. She had won this round, orchestrating the perfect exposure, but even she seemed aware that what had been revealed tonight was only the beginning. The guests whispered behind cupped hands, theories forming like wildfire. Alliances shifted subtly, glances once friendly now laced with suspicion. The celebration was gone, replaced by a fragile, uneasy silence that threatened to crack at any moment. I realized then, with a sinking clarity, that this family was fractured in ways that could not be mended with apologies or explanations. The hidden truths, the lies, the protective deceptions, they had set in motion a chain of events that would not easily end. And in the center of it all, one truth remained undeniable. The identity of the person Claire had been protecting would ignite a war none of us were prepared for. Tonight was only the prelude. The real reckoning was yet to come.